Did you have a client when you left?
I had nothing. I had nothing but hubris.
I love it.
But it was the first and so far only acquisition the Atlantic has ever made in its 160 something year plus history.
She just sold her company. She sat in a room full of men negotiating the biggest deal of her lifetime. Wait, she sold for how much? I can't even believe she managed to get double her valuation. Let's keep this just between us.
Hey, 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 and welcome back to another episode of The Exit Whisperer. I am so excited for our next guest because she's like kind of intimidating in what she was able to do in the agency space. I have always watched her from afar, from when she was building up huge and became president of such a giant, literally huge digital organization, independently owned. Like that was a fantastic run. I was watching her there. Then she launched her own company, Fair Design. And just 2 years later, her agency was acquired by The Atlantic, which is so fascinating because it's a different type of acquirer for an agency. You know, there's so many paths that we can go. And so I've always admired her and her ability to do that. And then she became a part of The Atlantic. And then she spun off from The Atlantic again. So this story is filled with lots and lots of juicy tidbits about going through the process of M&A as an agency. I'm really, really proud of her. I look up to her, and I just can't wait for you to hear some of her incredible gems of wisdom. Coming up is Kate Watts of Long Dash. Welcome, Kate, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm so happy to come here because I'm so impressed by your journey, and from watching it from afar, I have so many questions. Okay, so I'm just jumping in.
Yeah, do it.
Start. Okay, so you are president and rock star at Huge, which is this uber cool, very well known, certainly at this point in the world, digital agency, you know, top of their game. And you decide in 2017 that you're going to launch a new agency, Fair Design. Tell me about how that decision came to be and how did it go? Like, I need to know how that went, that transition.
No, you're absolutely right. It was like walking away at the top of your game, which is kind of a crazy thing to do. But I had been at Huge for a decade at that point. When I started, I want to say it was like under 100 people. And by the time I left, it was over 1,500. So it had grown incredibly fast. And it was an amazing trajectory, an incredible ride. And I learned just about everything in my career in those 10 years. It was phenomenal. But towards the end of my tenure there, I had left the New York office to open up the DC office, which is where I am now. And I loved being out on my own. I mean, I had somebody else's capital, but ultimately they said, here's your remit. Go to DC, figure out how to tap into that market, open up our opportunities within government. How can we bring best-in-class user experience to constituents, and go forth? And over the course of a year, when I had done that, we grew pretty quickly and I loved it. I definitely have the entrepreneurial bug. I always have. Then I took over some more of the US offices because that was, successful, and spent a lot of time turning around or shifting or repositioning a lot of the US offices. And what I realized in that period is like, no, I really just want to be building. I really want to be starting something from scratch. And I decided that it was time. After 10 years, I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot on my own and start an agency that was based in DC. Trying to do some similar work, but with slightly different kind of Kate nuance to it. And so I took the leap and left.
Did you have a client when you left, or did you say, I'm going to start this and then build it? Or like, did you have one that you knew you could start with?
I had nothing. I had nothing but hubris.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
Which in hindsight is insane. I was like, like walking up to the roulette table and just putting it all in black. Yeah, I mean, I left Huge with no real plan other than a vision for how I wanted to run this company. And so it was just me, and I went to work just marketing myself, but very quickly landed a couple clients.
Well, no kidding, very quickly, because the thing that when I was reading about you, I saw started in 2017, sold in 2019. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Wow. So the growth trajectory, walking out of Huge without a client
Right.
and then growing
Yeah.
that quickly must have been an incredible and interesting ride. Tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. So I think it helped that I had curated a network of incredible clients and former colleagues and partners over the years that had been distributed really across Fortune 500. That
Yeah.
helped. Um, Being from Huge, and I like to think the good work I did on clients helped with my reputation.
Yeah, of course.
So it was also at a time, though, I got to be honest, the agency world goes through cycles. It goes from, the big, larger global holding companies down to the smaller boutique, down to like we're integrated, down to specialized. Right now, I think the playbook is out the window. I don't know what the hell it is now,
Well, it's
but
nutty right now. It's nutty.
yeah, but for the past 20 years up to that point in my career, you could kind of see that cycle. And we were entering a phase where there were a lot of the Fortune 500 were going back to, we want boutique, we want nimble. And so I think that's part of why it was so fast and furious. I hit it just the right moment. They were looking for something a little bit different. I was really focused on brand experience design and brand in terms of user experience was really coming to the forefront. So I hit that at the right moment. And so I think that clients just called me up and said, we want something different, we want something new. We know we can trust you because of your experience at Huge. So sign us up and you'll be cheaper, which
Right.
unfortunately was true.
I know. But it's hard not to be, right? Because Huge is in fact huge. So they have to justify these insane amounts.
Exactly.
Right.
So yeah, so ended up growing really fast and then ended up getting a phone call from the Atlantic completely unexpectedly though. It wasn't like I was like, oh, here's my runway. I'm going to make this amount and off I go. It was completely unexpected.
So you had it's not like you set out. I guess one question I have is like when you started out, did you even think about the end game, about where that would be?
No, again, I look back on how incredibly naive and arrogant I was to think that I could just stand this thing up and get going. And I had no real exit strategy. I think if I'm being honest, I probably thought I'd run it for years and have it be more of a legacy company for me. And I didn't even really know all the options and opportunities for exit. I had never been through one. I had been through the machine of Huge and then, IPG and holding company world. So I didn't even really think that was in the cards for me. So no.
You get this call. Did you know them? Like, was it someone you knew at the Atlantic that was like, let's do this?
It was a recruiter who was a friend of mine, who had been commissioned by them to find a president for their creative consultancy. So it wasn't even looking for acquisition. It was for a role to run essentially their agency. So it wasn't even for buying my business. It evolved in that discussion rather rapidly.
Well, that's because you had an existing infrastructure. Did you have employees at that time at Fair?
Yeah, I mean, we stopped up to, we had about, let's say 5 full-time and then a network of freelance, which to this day I fundamentally believe in. So we had our core senior leadership and then, freelance. And a couple of them were several of them are former Hugers that I had brought on.
So how do you shift the conversation from, hey, Kate, we want you to run our internal agency at the Atlantic to, hey, Atlantic, I want you to buy Fair Design? Like, how did that shift happen?
Honestly, it was just that. If you want me, you have to
said it.
Buy me. So it was honestly, it was the first conversation. I was really, first of all, I'm always going to take a phone call from a venerable institution like the Atlantic. So I had been a massive fan of the publication, avid reader. It's based in DC. And I knew nothing about publishing. That's the other thing. Like I get really excited about industry I know nothing about. And so I was really fascinated by the fact that they have, a lot of publishers need to diversify their revenue.
Yes. Yes.
Um, they typically make money on subscriptions and ad sales, but they have research arms, insights arms, and in this case, a consultancy that they had started, I don't know, about 7 to 10 years prior. And it had done really well. It was doing a lot of editorial and communications work, thought leadership, standing up publications or publishing platforms, newsrooms for larger companies. They were without a leader. And I said, it was about 50 people at the time. And I was like, it's interesting. I'm really fascinated by this model. I'd love to figure it out. But at the same time, I don't know that I'd want to take a step away from what I'm building and go into something much smaller than what I had done in the past. But I do think there's something really compelling about what I'm doing at Fair, in that I'm thinking about experience design and brand experience holistically, and what you guys are doing in terms of storytelling and narrative building. There's something interesting in the combination here. So I think it would be pretty powerful if you bought Fair and then I came over as your president. But otherwise, I don't see how we could make this work, 'cause I'm not going to walk away from my baby. And so, but then I hung up the phone. I remember thinking, well, damn, did I really just ask them to buy? Did I ask the Atlantic to buy me? Because
It's amazing because it's not a typical acquirer. All the holdings have
No.
like this whole machine.
Right.
And here's this media company, and it's like, okay. And so how did they react, respond, tell me when they came back?
I figured when I have the phone, that was going to be it. Like, I'm sure they've got other candidates that are going to be a lot less complicated.
Yep.
And it was the opposite. They got really excited about the vision we talked through. And they truly, really wanted to bring what was called at the time Atlantic 57 much more into mainstream, right? And get more mainstream clients and get more visibility. And I had the ability to do that. So I think for them, they were very, they found it compelling. And so they
Right,
called,
because they wanted to build out this agency model through Atlantic 57, and
Exactly.
bringing your clients in could actually be very beneficial.
Exactly right, 1,000%. That there was just, it should have been exponential. So they called me back and they said, okay, we'll do it. And I was floored because I had never, I was like, oh shit, I just signed up for something. I don't know how I haven't thought through, but it was par for the course at that point in my early entrepreneurial career. Hadn't really thought anything through. And then we got very quickly to start negotiating what a buy would look like, what an integration would look like. And I have to tell you, I didn't think twice about it. One, because it was the Atlantic. Two, it was still early enough in my company's growth to be like, you know what, if this doesn't work, I'll just pull up stakes and reboot.
Right.
And the third thing was, at the time, the Atlantic was transitioning to full ownership by Emerson Collective, which is Lorene Powell Jobs. So in my mind, I was like, okay, so worst case, I'm being bought by Lorene Powell Jobs.
Yep.
That sounds good. I'll figure it out. And so
It's a good story, even if it didn't, like the whole arc of the story was so good for you to take that chance. But okay, so you're like fresh out of starting your first business, a couple of years. How did you figure out how to value it, how to negotiate the deal, what was appropriate, all of it?
I asked any business advisor that I trust, my accountant, just about anybody who would listen. My network in that world wasn't as broad as it is now. It's night and day. I look back and I think, oh my gosh, I was truly so uneducated in the process. And my one regret on that is I didn't ask for more. I kind of held back. So I'm like, we're brand new. And even though we had a pretty good, I think we could have been valued even higher than we were. Our client base was pretty phenomenal. I just wasn't confident enough in my story.
Of course.
So I undervalued.
Right. I totally feel you in that moment. Like I can picture you being there. You have had all of this success at Huge. You've just started. You're 2 years in.
Yeah.
You have fabulous entrepreneurial delusion of like, yes, I'm just going to do this. And, I see you there and then it's time to sell. And you're like, oh my God, I'm only 2 years in. Like, am I really worth this? So I totally get that. And so did you negotiate it on your own? Did you have a lawyer represent you?
No, I did it on my own.
Oh my God, Kate.
Yeah, I did it on my own. I mean, I had an attorney come in and check all of the paperwork and all that good stuff. But no, in terms of coming up with the final sale price, it was me. And probably why I could have done better elsewhere. I would never do that again. But it was the first and so far only acquisition the Atlantic has ever made in its 160-something year plus history. So
It's a fantastic story. Like
yeah,
the story itself is
the
fantastic.
story's great, but it's nice when you have money with it.
Tell me with the story. Okay, so we've got the story, and now you're with the Atlantic. So
Yeah.
you go to Atlantic 57, you're running that, your team comes over.
Yeah, I mean, everything transitioned over. So we integrated our clients with theirs, our team with theirs. And it was exhilarating and incredibly challenging at the same time.
Tell me more.
I had to take a lot of time to really understand their business. It was like nothing I had ever seen, and vice versa. They had never really been in the world of a digital agency. And we had to spend a lot of time really figuring out, what is this new entity? What does it look like? How do you maintain the storied heritage of the Atlantic and its editorial roots, and how it approaches clients from, taking best practices from the Atlantic to create incredible stories and thought leadership and content, with what we did, which was really creating best-in-class user experiences and digital businesses and brands. And it was hard because you have two very different types of talent. And it took, I would say, at least a year, about 18 months, to really shift and get our sea legs under us to be a truly formidable agency out in the world. And name recognition was a challenge.
Tell me about it, because we're going to go there in a minute. But tell me why it was a challenge then.
Being part of the Atlantic was a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
And my colleagues at the Atlantic I don't think they disagree with this at all. I think they would absolutely agree with it. Where, we partnered quite a bit with the sales team at the Atlantic. Phenomenal group, phenomenally talented people who were selling, campaigns and advertising and platforms, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so they would pull us into conversations. So they might have a meeting with a very, very top client and say, we'd love to pull in Atlantic 57 to talk to you about their services. And so they'd be like, of course, bring them along, and anytime you'd say you're from the Atlantic, it opens doors. And so we'd sit in these meetings, and they would look at us and they say, oh, so you're the in-house studio for the Atlantic. We're like, no. They already have one. It's
Atlantic is not our client. You would be our client.
Right. The Atlantic is not our client. We are a partner of the Atlantic. So no, we have nothing to do with that. And they had a really hard time understanding that we were a separate entity. And then the second thing is they already had a lot of their agencies. So they weren't prepared to have that conversation about us being an agency in our own right to compete with the ones they were already considering.
Right. When agencies were probably in the room. Weren't they in the room? Like
some were. Yeah, it was really awkward because it was very hard for us to kind of present ourselves. Even we would say exactly what we were, but people hear what they want to hear.
I know.
So it got very complicated trying to differentiate.
I really understand that. And, one of the challenges with acquisitions in general is if you cannot find the sweet spot of synergy, it becomes really problematic. And if you're coming in on these Atlantic meetings and it's feeling like a disconnect as being part of that brand, I would imagine that would be really hard. And it was, in fact, just a couple of years later, right, that you ended up changing the name. Talk to me a little bit about that and how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, it was more than just changing the name. We ended up becoming operationally independent and really just spinning off. Yeah, I mean, we had successes though. We grew, we doubled really in size. So the model and the vision worked, right? I think how we were showing up in the world was really and is still really compelling to a lot of folks who love that we have that journalistic approach. But what became abundantly clear was that in the long run, it was going to be much harder to continue to scale, still being kind of boxed into the publishing world. We had two choices, really. One was to integrate fully into the Atlantic and become more of sort of a brand services strategic partner to clients in some form or fashion. And what that would look like would take time to figure out. And other publishers do that, right? Or we spin out entirely, rebrand, and we're born of this venerable institution, but we also have our own identity and we can lean much more into that journalistic aspect because there's a lot of church and state in publishing. And so we agreed with the leadership team, let's go with the latter. The former feels like a lot of effort with no real understanding of how it could net out. But we have a better shot of kind of figuring out who we are independent. So we took it.
Was the basic philosophy that you as an agency would be more successful just as an agency, and the Atlantic would invest in that agency, fine, like great, but you needed to go be an agency. So understanding that the two, it wasn't as natural of a fit. And it sounds like they acknowledged it relatively early and then said, okay, we'll invest in this and then launch this new actual agency as Long Dash. Is that right?
It is. I think, I think we had an expectation of how it could scale. And I think we very quickly met that expectation. Again, in doubling in size, it was pretty phenomenal. I think, though, we realized if we can get there, we can certainly go further. And I think
Yes.
what we realized is we definitely kind of reached diminishing returns being so tied to the Atlantic. So I don't think that was always the expectation of the thought. I think as we just got to a certain point, we realized we just started to come up against more and more of these challenges with some of the larger clients. And so, yeah, so that's why we decided to spin off and give us an opportunity to remove ourselves from that name.
So did all of the Atlantic 57 employees then become employees of Long Dash?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so we
Talk
went
to me about the whole experience. I need
oh
to
my
know.
God. It's amazing. The past 4 years, almost 5 of my life have been transformation and transition to integration to spin off. I mean, it's been every year it's been something new. So yeah, so the team had to first deal with our integration with Fair. And then like, what is happening here? Then we had to spin off. And even though we are incredibly brilliant at doing brand development, brand positioning, design work for clients, we did not want to perform surgery on ourselves. So we pulled in some ex-Pentagram folks to come in and help us really shape what this new brand would be. And we spent a number of months really spending time figuring out our new positioning and our new identity with the team. So our team was very, very engaged across the board in that. And in fact, one of our team members named the company inadvertently. So Long Dash came from one of my folks who's still with us. Yeah, but it was a massive challenge, really kind of figuring out who we were, who this new iteration of us is.
And how did the new ownership structure work? Like, is it yours now? How does it work as a whole?
Well, I mean, keeping to this trend of constant transformation, transition, for about 2 years, we were just operating independently. So we were still part of officially owned. I had a small equity stake, but an equity stake in Long Dash. And then last July, I was able to get back essentially majority ownership, and they have minority ownership. So it's come kind of full circle through a lot of, peaks and valleys and crazy journey to get here. But essentially it's almost like I've gone through this journey to regain back what I sold initially, in a way.
I'm so proud of you. And that is I couldn't be happier for you.
I don't know. It's either congratulations or condolences. Because
I bet on you any day of the week. And I know the agency space now is different. And I know it's changing. And I know there's all of it. But the fact that you were able to experience all of this, the sale to the Atlantic, the integration and building of Atlantic 57, the shift to Long Dash, the taking it back, like what a story. And now I think I can't wait to watch what's next for you. Tell me a little bit what's next for you and for Long Dash. I mean, your story's fascinating. I love it.
And I have to give a lot of credit to the Atlantic in the sense that they really do empower and they really do see opportunity and what's right. And what's
it sounds like it.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of understanding the process. I mean, it's always challenging going through any sort of exit integration and then I guess essentially a re-exit. But for all intents and purposes, I would say it was a positive journey. Now that it's, all on me again, I am I feel incredibly optimistic and I feel incredibly free to take some bigger, bolder risks. It's interesting though, I have a lot less of that sort of hubris and naivete. And I think I have a lot more understanding of how to pace myself.
Mhm.
And so when I look at what we have in the future, I want to be we are being very, very smart about the clients we're taking on, the type of work that we're doing, and very prescriptive about it. Because I think when we were in this big, heady time of building and selling and, evolving our positioning and taking on clients, um, and sometimes we got a little unwieldy. We were taking on too much and trying to be too many things. And I think this future stage for us is really all about staying focused and truly committing to our vision. And it's been incredibly rewarding, but also really challenging, not trying to do too much at once.
Well, it's really challenging not to go back to the state of what I call like a frenetic
Yes.
entrepreneurial energy where you just take everything, because it's not just excitement, it's also fear. Like
Yeah.
you
Oh,
want to I'll take this all on, because otherwise what are we going to do and how are we going to support the team and me, and it's a lot. I totally get it, and I love the discipline with which you're putting the parameters around Long Dash, what you'll say yes to and what you won't, I think is
yeah.
the
I
right.
guess it's our fearless era, is
Yes,
one way to look at it.
it is. It is. And do you look at this like now, knowing what you know? So
Hmm.
you're no longer, the young gal who started up as that, okay, I'm here design, I'm just going to do this. Here you are. We're a few years have passed, got some wisdom under your belt. Do you see Long Dash as something that you're going to build to sell? Is it a lifestyle business that's going to carry you through? Do you think about it? How do you approach that?
I think about it all the time. I
Yep.
think part of the next year is one, I want to see where the market goes. I mean, this
Yes.
has been the
Yes.
most tumultuous, I would say 24 months in the agency world that I have personally experienced, going on 25 plus years of doing it. And so I think I would be short-sighted to make any decisions immediately. But I always think that there's opportunity to exit down the road if it was the right opportunity.
Yep.
Because I do think there's something really amazing about folding into a larger platform or creating one, right? I mean, I would never just say, no, I'm going to hold on to it, or this is mine, or I'm trying to create legacy. To me, it's about what opportunity shows up. So I'm open to everything, but I just want to make sure that it makes sense. And again, it's not fear-based.
Yeah, I guess that's the learning, right? It's like you really had that experience where you sat in something that didn't feel organically
Right.
right. And so you guys quickly course corrected, which is great.
Right.
But you want to make sure that if you're to do it again, it's like really feels right. I had a similar experience, by the way. I sold to a tech company. I was an agency that sold to a tech company. And
Yeah.
the cross sale was not it just I would sit there and be like, you're not the right buyer. You have no idea what I'm talking about. And it was rough.
I
Rough.
think that is honestly, to me, it's the conversation.
Yeah.
So the really deep answer to your question is I talk with a lot of people. I'm a lot more potential buyers,
Yeah.
integrators, mergers,
Yeah.
partners, clients. I'm having a lot more informed conversations than I did 4 years ago. I mean, night and day.
Yep.
So for me, I don't have any one path laid out. Maybe I should. Maybe I'm being a little too I don't know. I'm not thinking broadly enough. But in those conversations for me, I'm really open to hearing from people who get it. And when they get it, it's really gratifying because I have had conversations in the past with folks who are really just trying to figure out how to squeeze more out of you and have an idea for what they think they want. And you're just going to get bought and thrown into something and churned up and out.
Yeah.
And when you do come across folks who really believe in what you're doing and see the future and see the vision, it is very powerful. And so I'm really trying to curate and create those conversations more and more in the next 6 months.
I love that, Kate. And I just will tell you, I would bet on you any day of the week. So
Oh,
just letting you know it's true.
well, I
Where should
appreciate
people
that.
connect with you? Where should they connect? LinkedIn? What's the best way to follow your work?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Kate Watts. We are longdash.co. So feel free to check us out. We also have a newsletter called On Brand. You'll
Okay.
probably find for longdash.co.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. I appreciate it.